Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction. So Senator Cruz is from Alberta. That's the Texas part of Canada. I'm from Quebec. For those of you who haven't been, I'll help you situate it. It's a place that's so far left that it makes Vermont look like Texas. So this is where I grew up. I really came a long way, a la Hamilton. It is fitting that you brought up Hamilton, because what I want to talk about today is the American dream. And he is the founder who embodies the American dream. I mean, you want to talk about a rags to riches story? He wasn't landed gentry in Virginia. He came from nowhere, rose very high, and he built the commercial republic. I mean, we are all Hamiltonians in one way or another, whether we know it or not, because we live in Hamilton's America, I think more so than we live in Jefferson's America. So today I want to talk to you about the American dream, and to do so I want to go back to 1864 and invoke an important American statesman who hasn't been mentioned so far, Abraham Lincoln. He's giving a short speech at a sanitary fair in Baltimore. Sounds thrilling, right? And this address is of little note, but it contains a passage that has always stuck with me because I think it sheds so much light on the nature of political debate in America. He said, "The world has never had a good definition of the word liberty. And the American people just now are much in want of one. We all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing." What Lincoln said of liberty applies just as well to all our core political ideals. Think of it. In America, we don't disagree about whether liberty, equality, rights, or democracy are good. We disagree about what they mean. We disagree about what they entail. And so, when it comes to the American dream, arguably the most cherished term in our political lexicon, all Americans, conservatives, liberals, libertarians, and those in between, champion the American dream. They just don't all understand it to mean the same thing. To adapt Lincoln's saying, you could say, we all declare for the American dream, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing. This is key to making sense of our political debates, including the 18-month-long political debate we're now engaged in called our presidential campaign. I challenge every single person in this room to name the single Republican or Democratic candidate who will say either of the following things. The American dream is just doing fine, no need to worry about it. Or even better, one who says, you know what, I don't care about the American dream, upward mobility is a little bit overrated. You know full well that they will all be singing from the same hymnal. Democrats, Republicans, and whatever Donald Trump ends up running as. They're all going to tell us that the American dream isn't faring well, and that they pledge to give every American who's willing to work hard a chance to make it. If you compare Mitt Romney and Barack Obama's statements on the American dream in 2012, they're nearly indistinguishable. The catchphrases are the same, but the substance is different. And this is what I'd like to talk to you about today. When you start to carefully pay attention to what the politicians and the pundits are saying, you realize, in fact, that there are two very different American dreams that both go by the same name. To clarify things, I found that it's useful to invoke the metaphorical ladder of opportunity. I'm sure all of you have heard this analogy to describe the American dream. And what you find when you look at how the left and the right talk about it is that there are three core disagreements, and these are the three that I'd like to talk to you about this morning. The first one is, where do ladders come from? How do you create opportunity? Second, once you've got the ladders, what does it take to climb them? What does it take to succeed in America? And third, what is preventing certain people from climbing the ladder of opportunity? What holds them back? And more importantly, what do we owe them? What must we do for our fellow Americans to help them climb? So these are the three that I'd like to look at to clarify the differences between these two conceptions of the American dream. Let's begin with the first question. Where do you get ladders of opportunity from? How do you create opportunities that allow certain people to lift themselves out of poverty and others simply to rise higher than where they were born? Now, if you speak to conservatives and libertarians, if you speak to people who run businesses, folks like you guys, What's the answer? Free markets. I would say capitalism, but regrettably, it's become a four-letter word. So I'll maybe take my cues from my host and refer to the free enterprise system. Now, I don't think I need to explain this one in any great depth to an audience of businessmen and businesswomen, but there are a lot of young people here in the audience, so maybe it warrants explaining in very plain English. What do we mean by the free enterprise system? It's pretty simple. We basically mean free markets, property rights, and the rule of law. The liberty to buy, sell, trade, manufacture, work, produce, exchange, invest. It's the think of it this way. If you really wanted to help a bankrupt, broken, corrupt third world country, these are the legal and political reforms you would implement to really give people a chance to rise. It's what Singapore and South Korea did, and it's what India is trying to do. It's all of the things that we take for granted in the US. The fact that we have title deeds to our property. The fact that there are patents and copyrights. The fact that we have bankruptcy laws. The fact that we have access to capital markets. That we have the freedom to lay off employees who are not performing well. When you put all of these things in place, you create a dynamic society. This is the key thing to understanding the promise of the free enterprise system, is how dynamic it is. You create opportunities. You allow some people to rise and others to fall. You shake things up. I'm always amused, I must tell you, at how conservatives in this country have embraced the most unconservative institution known to man, namely markets. Markets change things up. As Schumpeter said, they're about creative destruction. They're about, when I moved to Texas in 2004, Blockbuster was everywhere. Where's Blockbuster today? It's finished. Netflix is here instead. And it's in these disruptions, in these destructions, in these creations that opportunities are found. The opportunity to start a business of your own, the opportunity to grow a business, the opportunity to hire someone. This is where jobs come from. So you pointed out that jobs come from small businesses. I'll one-up you. Most jobs are created by new businesses coming into being, rather than existing businesses growing. And of course, all businesses, when they start, are small. And this is an area where the Free Enterprise Institute does so much good by teaching students, university professors, and community leaders about the benefits of the free enterprise system and the virtues of character that make it possible. And this is an area, I must tell you, when I travel the country, I do a lot of work with the chambers of commerce, where the state businesses, you guys, the business leaders in the community, can do so much good by championing a proper understanding of capitalism and pushing back against cronyism. So regrettably, in many parts of the country, people have come to believe that actually the free enterprise system is a system by which big business gets into bed with big government, and they have a mutually beneficial relationship where they stay on top, and they create these artificial barriers to entry that prevent newcomers from arriving. The subsidies, the tariffs, the bailouts, the mandates, the licensing requirements. What do they all have in common? They're a political way of enhancing your bottom line. Cronyism is unfair, and it gives capitalism a terrible name, as people come to believe that the free enterprise system is fundamentally unjust. Here's a lesson for the young people in the room. If you remember one thing, and one thing only about this talk, remember the following thing. Capitalism is a synonym for competition. Any measure that increases competition is aligned with capitalism. Anything that decreases competition is cronyism and not capitalism. And incidentally, I can't help pointing out, it's the same thing with federalism, one of the brilliant principles in our Constitution. Federalism isn't about protecting the rights of states. States don't have rights. You have rights. Federalism is about creating competition between the 50 states, to have them vie for your residency and your tax dollars by delivering the best possible policies. Competition is at the heart of the free market system and at the heart of federalism. This, I would argue, is the consensus view on the right, if you speak to conservatives and to libertarians. Now, what about the left? Where do they think that ladders of opportunity come from? Now, in fairness to the left, I got to tell you something. They begrudgingly recognize that free markets work. This is one of the great unsung victories of the 20th century. There are no communists and socialists in America. Now you're going to say, hold on one second, Azerrad, are you not following the news? Did you not hear about the independent senator from Vermont? He claims to be a socialist. He's not a socialist. He doesn't believe that the government should control the means of production. He doesn't have a long-term view where he wants to build a classless Marxist world state. He doesn't have any 5-year plans. No one in America is calling for the Amtrakification of our economy. What Bernie Sanders wants is a bigger welfare state. We already have generous entitlements for the elderly. We already take care of the poor. He wants to provide for the middle class. That's not socialism. If pressed against a corner, liberals have to admit that there's no alternative to free markets. They'll qualify it right away and say, hold on one second. We want them properly regulated, supervised by the state, but at the end of the day, they recognize that markets are here. What they do, though, when they speak of the American dream, is that they de-emphasize the role of businesses and they overemphasize the role of government. When they see people like you, when they think of businesses, they say, oh, that's not good. That's for-profit corporations. That's where selfishness and greed rules. You can't trust these people. You know who I trust? The government. Because it's made up of public servants. Isn't that a delicious word? People selflessly devoted to the common good who have no greed and selfishness. That's the people who are creating jobs. So what does it take to fire up the engines of economic growth, to build ladders of opportunity? We need more government pumping money into the economy, more Keynesian stimuluses. The very clever line that they've come up with, he's from San Antonio. What's his name? The former mayor who's now at HUD. Pardon me? No, the twin brothers, their mother was Castro, yes. Castro, how could I forget that name? Castro's line is, we need to invest in opportunity. So not Americans working, building, creating, but the folks in the state capitals and in DC, they're the ones who grow the economy. So that's one core disagreement. Where do the ladders come from? Now, you've got your ladders. What does it take to climb them? Ladders aren't escalators. You don't just hop on them and get to the top. Now, you could see, though, listening to the left, why you may come to think that ladders are, in fact, like escalators. You see, again, no one on the left is going to deny the importance of hard work and perseverance and grit when talking about the American dream. In every Obama speech, there's a throwaway line about the importance of working hard. But that's not what they emphasize. The emphasis is always on what the government must do to help you up that very long, very difficult, very arduous climb up the ladder of opportunity. Free healthcare, free college, free pre-K, free daycare, a higher minimum wage, stricter labor laws, more paid vacation. The mindset here is that people just can't make it on their own. Do you guys remember You Didn't Build That? This is the corollary. You can't climb that. On every rung of the ladder, there's a government program to help you move up. Conservatives and libertarians, by contrast, make hard work the cornerstone of the American dream. The only way we know to convert opportunities into tangible achievements is through hard work. As my dad once taught me, the American dream isn't for dreamers, it's for workers. Or as Frederick Douglass said, and I think he's one of the greatest apostles of upward mobility that this country has ever had, opportunity is important, but exertion is indispensable. This is how he summed up his message to those who wanted to rise in America. Work, 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 work. Not transient and fitful effort, but patient, enduring, honest, unremitting, and indefatigable work into which the whole heart is put, and in which both temporal and spiritual affairs is the true miracle worker. In this regard, it pains me to say that our culture of work is not in very good shape. There was a time when Benjamin Franklin could say that America is the land of labor. There was a time when Alexis de Tocqueville could say that in America, work leads to everything. I think we've become much more comfortable with indolence than we once were. We don't all think that work is for suckers, but the stigma of dependence is fading. The place where it really hits me is with the sitcom Seinfeld. So Seinfeld did something that, to my knowledge, no American television show had ever done before. It depicted not one, but two grown men who don't work. So Kramer, as you know, never works. And George kind of works in the beginning, then he doesn't work for a long time, and then he's got a series of make-believe, pointless jobs that culminate in Kruger Industrial Smoothing. Now you'll say, Azerrad, lighten up, it's a sitcom, it's meant to make us laugh. Why are you sounding like a crusty old conservative complaining about a funny television show? Here's my question to you. Why is it that we managed to make America laugh from I Love Lucy onwards without once depicting a grown man who didn't work? We have become much more comfortable tolerating indolence. And this erosion of a culture of work, I think, is one of the most underappreciated threats to the American dream. Public opinion today imperiously forbids many, many things. You can't smoke, you have to recycle, and you should never eat trans fats. But not working, that's most definitely not one of them. Not working out, that's bad. Not working, it happens. The stigma against dependence is fading. When you combine that with two other things, namely the fact that we pay people not to work, and second that, and this is what drives me crazy, we prevent so many people from working either by imposing these bogus licensing requirements on these simple professions. I want to ask you a question. Why is it in America that in all 50 states, including Texas, it requires a license to do manicures? Why? Because they've set up a cartel. And they realize, let's create artificial barriers to entry to prevent people from exercising these simple professions. The other thing we do is we raise the price of labor. So what happens when you raise the price of something by raising the minimum wage? You have less of it. So the minimum wage is now $15 an hour in Seattle. What do you think happens? We're paying people not to work. We're discouraging them from climbing the ladder of opportunity, and then we're saying it's okay if you don't climb. And then we wonder why our labor force participation rate is at a 40-year low. If you want to see what this looks like in the future, go to Puerto Rico, that has much more generous welfare benefits than we do, and much more onerous regulations to comply with. On the left, by contrast, you almost never hear about this. I mean, what I just said is a foreign language. The idea that the federal, the state, or the local governments are somehow discouraging people from working, that's not part of the rhetoric. The focus, rather, if you ask them, what threatens the American dream? The answer is usually, you guys, the rich, the stinking 1%ers who have made it all the way to the top or were born there. And you know what they're now doing? They're pulling the ladder of opportunity behind them. Now, I don't need to tell you, unless you've been living in a cave for the past 4 years, that we've had a mood of national hysteria in this country about income inequality since the rise of the Occupy Wall Street movement in September 2011. Occupy Wall Street, thankfully, is dead as a doornail. I presume, did you have one in Houston, or were you spared an Occupy Wall Street movement? You had one? Okay, well, it hit all of America then. They're finished. Their rhetoric, their pernicious worldview has penetrated the mainstream. And what we are now told is that what really threatens the American dream is not the crushing burden of job-killing regulations and taxes. It's not the erosion of a culture that celebrates and values hard work. It's not the perverse incentives of the welfare state that penalize people for working and getting married. It's not the collapse of the family amongst vast segments of the American population. It's not the failures of our union-dominated public school system. It's not the crushing burden of debt that we're passing on to the generation. No. The threat, we are told, comes from a statistical abstraction called rising income inequality. That's really what is ailing the poor in America and preventing them from moving up. That if you look at the top income bracket, the people in it today earn a whole lot more than a whole bunch of different people in that bracket 30 years ago. The fact that Clayton Kershaw, who's the highest paid baseball player today, makes 30 times more than Nolan Ryan did when he was the highest paid baseball player in 1980. Different people at different times
The only thing they have in common is that they're in the same income bracket. That, we are told, is what is harming the poor and preventing them from moving up. That is complete nonsense. I think, Brittany, the place you were doing work in was the Third Ward. Is that what it's called? Let's all go to the Third Ward. Let's go to the broken neighborhoods in America and look around and see what is it exactly that ails them. Why would a child who had the misfortune of being born in a poor family in the Third Ward be any less likely to graduate high school, to avoid drugs, to go to college, to not have children out of wedlock, to find a job, if the average income of those within the top 1% income bracket has increased over the past 3 decades? It absolutely makes no sense. And furthermore, there is no evidence whatsoever that the rise in income inequality has led to a decline in mobility. Raj Chetty, who's a brilliant young economist at Harvard, published a colossal study a couple of years ago. He and his colleagues poured through millions of IRS records. And what they found is that the odds of moving up in America are no greater, but also no smaller than they were 20 years ago, 40 years ago, or 60 years ago. And before that, we don't have any data. So it is true that income inequality is rising, but upward mobility is not declining. What you start to suspect, which is the conclusion I've reached, and I'm going to end on this note, is the more closely you look into this, is that all this talk of inequality is actually a way for animosity against the rich to masquerade as compassion for the poor. Which will bring me to the last thing I want to tell you. You know what is most pernicious about this rhetoric, about this transformed conception of what makes the American dream possible? It's not the harm that it does to our budgets. It's not the damage that it does to our Constitution. It's the damage it does to our national character. Rather than embolden us to act, pull ourselves by the bootstraps, and create our own opportunities, it encourages quietude as we await our government-issued ladders. Rather than draw inspiration from those who've made it and seek to emulate them, it fosters resentment and envy by calling success inequality. Rather than uniting all of us around a common American dream, it pits us against one another. Not we the people, but we the 99% versus the 1%. Rather than form citizens who ask what to me is the quintessential American question, what can I do for myself, for my family, for my community, and for my country today? It instead gives rise to citizens who ask, what must my country do for me? How have I been aggrieved today? What am I owed? The traditional American ethic of achievement slowly gives rise to the progressive ethic of aggrievement. What a sad development in a country that is known the world over, even in Quebec, as the land of opportunity. And this is why the work that you do is so important. You're not only teaching the next generation what the free enterprise system is, you're paying attention to the virtues of character that make it possible and that it fosters. Thank you for supporting this fine organization.